How many people in the room think that money is the most valuable thing in the world? All right, not a single hand. How many people think love is the most valuable thing? I'd put, that's like maybe half the room. How about family? A couple hands. How about health? Okay, that's like a good fifth of the room. How about spirituality, spirit, God, goddess? Okay, so there's all these things. How about sex? In my 20s, I definitely would have raised my hand. So there's all these things that we value as humans more than money. Very few people on their deathbed think about money. And most people do think about love, family, God, spirituality, goddess, art, creativity, all these things. So the question I want to explore today is why, when we think of value, do we mostly think about money and numbers and things that can be quantified? That's the exploration we're gonna be in for the next hour or so. And once you get into this, I actually spent 3 years thinking about this question, writing this book, The Last Safe Investment, with my co-author, Bryan Franklin. And one thing I found is that when you start thinking about that question, it's extremely difficult to think about the concept of value without thinking about money or numbers. It's really hard. Like, I don't know if there was some time before money existed when people could think that way, but ever since money has existed pretty much, and certainly now in the last couple hundred years of capitalism, our whole concept of value is completely intertwined with the concept of money in ways that are very hard to tease out psychologically and conceptually. And yet we should be able to do that, right? No one raised their hand when I asked that first question. So why can't we tease these things out, and what's the challenge around that? I want to introduce a concept today where, and I've actually never spoken about this concept publicly. I just actually came up with the phrase today at lunch while I was thinking about how I wanted to share with you today. And the concept is what I call humanistic currency. Humanistic currency. Humanistic can refer to humanism, which is a philosophy with a multi-hundred-year history and is related to the Enlightenment, and there's a whole history to that philosophy. And then in a more recent usage, there's something called humanistic psychology. How many people have heard of that concept? A lot of the kind of personal growth work that we're doing here at a festival like Wanderlust comes from a movement called the Humanistic Psychology movement, which had one of its kind of central birthplaces in the Bay Area, and also kind of Esalen Institute, just a bit south of here, is associated with that in the 60s and 70s. And the idea of humanistic psychology is that it was a response to other kind of accounts of human psychology, particularly Freud and Skinner. And Freud kind of viewed humans as subject to all these very pathological and neurotic drives, and Freudian-based psychology is really about trying to kind of just fit in and like be normal and non-neurotic, which I've never been very good at. So humanistic psychology came along and said, well, let's not talk about the pathology, let's not talk about what's wrong with humans, let's not talk about all the kind of neuroses and dark drives, let's talk about the potential. Let's talk about what can humans become. And I think that whenever you talk to people about who they want to become, what they want for life, what they want to contribute, they talk about all the things you raise your hands for. Love, family, health, spirituality. They don't tend to raise their hand for money. So that's humanistic. Currency. Now, currency has many, many different meanings, many different angles, takes. I'm definitely not an economics expert on the definition of currency. But some very basic ideas around currency is that it's something that's used to trade value. So it's a medium of exchange. Like today, you've possibly been trading little bits of paper for food, and then those people are going to trade that paper for whatever they're going to do, the chairs that you sat in at the restaurant. And so it's this thing that circulates, currency. It's like water. There's a current that circulates, and it circulates as a medium of exchange. Another aspect of currency is that it can be used as a measurement of value. So if everybody in a society or a culture or a community is using the same thing as a medium of exchange, you can then measure the value of things compared to each other with that unit. So again, I'm not an expert on the history of this, but at different times people have used like cow shells, like different kind of shells. Gold has been probably over, if you look at the history of humanity, has been the most common, long-standing unit of measure and also medium of exchange. All kinds of things. In wartime, when there's currency collapses, if you read the histories of like wartime or currency collapses, people will use cigarettes, they'll use brandy. There's actually, in Russia, there's been a period when people were using sex toys, I think. It was very strange. There was like a factory that like had this overabundance of sex toys, and they were like using this as a medium of exchange. And so you could, whatever it was, whether it's shells or gold or whatever, you can kind of, I won't make the joke about the sex toys. You can measure things. You can say, okay, this is worth $10 and that's worth $20. So this is worth 2 times as much, roughly. And now we're in a very interesting time for this. How many people are interested in cryptocurrency right now, at least like learning about it? Okay, so it's like a third of the room. How many people are actually investing in cryptocurrency? Anybody? Okay. Bitcoin, yeah. Okay, so I'm not an expert on it, but what I do know is that we are in a period right now where we're in the most massive cultural upheaval and shift around what currency means probably ever, that's ever occurred. The only historical precedent was in the 50s and between the 50s and 70s of the last century, when we were going from a gold standard to a paper currency standard. And I think this shift to crypto digital currencies, Bitcoin and a million others that are arising, Ethereum, actually has much wider implications. So the point of all this is, there's all these things that can be quantified and have been used to exchange and measure value. And it serves a lot of purposes, very useful. We're not here to bash on that. But the problem is, most of the things that you raise your hands for and I raise my hands for cannot be quantified in any meaningful way. Think about love, for example. How could you possibly quantify love? Well, I kissed my partner 5 times today. That means we're twice as much as in love as last year when we only kissed twice a day. As soon as you're really adding a lot of numbers into the way you think about love, you're probably on the wrong track, unless you're a mathematician and you're in love with another mathematician. But but barring that case, numbers don't really add up, and the same is true for art. Recently, there was a painting by a painter named Micheal Basquiat, I'm probably mispronouncing it, who was a painter in the kind of Lower East Side art scene, Manhattan, in the 60s, that sold for like over $100 million, and it became one of the 10 most valuable paintings in the world. Now, I'm not an expert in art, so I can't say whether this is like objectively, by the standards of art or whatever, a good painting or not, but clearly many people, for different reasons, valued this piece of art at that much money. But does that mean that this is literally the most valuable piece of art, or one of the 10 most valuable pieces of art that has ever been created? That's an absurd concept. Or that it's 100 million times more valuable than a piece of art that a friend of yours gave for your birthday or something. Numbers don't really make sense. And if you meet people who are really devoted to different areas, so people who are really serious musicians, people who are really serious yogis, people who are really serious on a spiritual path, whatever it may be, people who are really serious about whatever art or activism or whatever it may be, they don't have a way to quantify that really easily. It's an all-embracing experience by which they measure everything else. So I raised my hand for love, for example. So for me, I don't quantify love, but it's a way that I think about value. Like if I feel that my love for my girlfriend, for my family, for my friends is doing well, then I feel like my life is well. And money is related to that. I mean, in our culture, you really can't get away from money. Money's related to everything. So, if I didn't have a place to live, if I couldn't afford rent, if I couldn't afford food, that would obviously impact the quality of the love I'm able to experience with the people I love. But they're not directly commensurate, clearly not. So what I'm suggesting is that you can think of 1 or 2 or 3 areas of your life that are really important for you, and not the like Hallmark card kind of like, yeah, I really care about this or that, but like that really matter to you, that like you're going down with a ship to like go as deeply into this thing as you possibly can while you're alive. Pick 2 or 3 things. It could be romantic love. It could be your children if you have children. It could be your spirituality. It could be art. One model I have for this, there's a musician who is a friend of mine who also happens to be my favorite artist in any genre. Her name is Adey Bell, A-D-E-Y, Bell. Look her up, by the way. She's a fantastic singer-songwriter. She is my archetype of a true artist. And what I mean by that is she is 31, I think, early 30s. She's been at this for over 20 years. Music is her life. Everything is measured in music. And it's a non-quantifiable measurement. So she doesn't say, oh, well, I played this many gigs, I wrote this many songs, I played this many notes. That doesn't make sense. That's not how musicians or artists think. She thinks, okay, my art has developed in this way. It's gone deeper in that way. I've shared it to this audience that I want to share it with. And she thinks this is the medium by which she thinks about value in her life, including her relationship. Like, she's recently engaged, and the man that she's with is very much a part of her artistic mission, and he's really supporting what she's doing and really believes in what she's doing. And he has a very spiritual relationship to her music. So it's all encompassing. So if you pick a couple of these areas, and I recommend at least 2 or 3, because then you can kind of balance them off of each other and not have everything be about one thing, like one person in your life or one relationship or one type of relating. Pick 2 or 3, family, romantic love, health, spirituality, art. I mean, if you're at like 5 or 7, it kind of gets very loosey-goosey and hard to wrap your head around. But pick a few of these areas and start really noticing how all the decisions in your life are actually creating value in those areas, and that value is really majorly important about why you're here on the planet. And so the way you measure then, if we're not going to measure in a quantitative way, which doesn't make sense in these areas of life, is a concept I call richness. Okay, so I like to make a distinction between riches, which is, let's say, a pile of gold, a quantifiable amount that is a unit of exchange, and you know what you can buy with it, and there's a sort of an objective sense of what its value is within a society. That's riches. Richness is a quality, is qualitative. So there's quantitative value and qualitative value, and they're like different operating systems. They're completely different ways of thinking about value. So when you use the word richness, take, for example, the phrase richness of flavor. That doesn't mean there was a lot of one thing. So table sugar, for example, is a strong flavor. It's strong, it makes an impression, but it's not rich. It's a very simple flavor. There's not a subtlety to it. But if you take chocolate, for example, a very fine chocolate will mix a lot of different elements. It'll mix the cacao and some sugar and maybe some different flavorings and all these things to create a very subtle richness of flavor. Or you'll talk, you hear wine people talk about the richness of the flavor and various aspects of the wine. Or say, for example, a novel. You'll hear a phrase like, this novel there was a richness of language in the novel. So richness is a concept that can allow you to start thinking about how you're doing in different areas of value that isn't quantifiable. And you can think, okay, like how rich is my relationship with spirit, for example? Is there a richness there? Does it connect? Do I have am I part of a narrative that's really meaningful to me? Do I have a felt, is there a somatic sense where I'm feeling spirit in my body? Is there a community around this spiritual belief or practice? Am I getting wisdom about other areas of my life, say relationships or career or whatever, through this spiritual context? And the more of those strands that weave together, the richer, the more complex that area is for you. And I really do mean complex and not complicated. They're different things. And a complexity of different factors that are coming together and creating this really rich experience of whatever it is you value. So here's the challenge, is that when we talk about investing, planning for our future, careers, all these things, we're almost always talking about value that can be quantified and exchanged with money and numbers. So there's kind of an alienation built into our very way we think about value in our current capitalist system. And just so you know where I stand, I do believe we're heading into a post-capitalist age very quickly. I have no idea what that's going to look like. I don't know if it's going to be better or worse, but it seems pretty clear to me that it's happening. And it's going to look very different, I think, than past attempts to overthrow capitalism with, say, socialism or fascism or whatever it was. We're heading into the great unknown. We really don't know. But I don't think it's going to look like anything we've known capitalism to be. And yet we still have this very, I think now, archaic and outmoded way of thinking of planning for the future, where we try to store up basically as much money as we can. That's the way most personal finance plans go. And you have different philosophies on how to invest it, how to save it, what you should invest in, how much you need, all these things. But the basic idea is the way you're going to have a good future, a secure future, freedom, happiness, all these good things, is the most important thing to do is focus on hoarding as much money as you can, basically. And I mean, can you see the crazy in that? It's insane, actually. Nobody actually thinks money is the most valuable thing in the world, and yet it's the centerpiece of when we talk about how to create value for ourselves in the future. So how can we start thinking about self-investing, investing in yourself, investing for your future in this sort of non-quantifiable, qualitative way that is more humanistic? The thing to do is to notice the ways that money enhance or detract from the richness in these areas that you care about. So again, I'm not here to bash money. In our current system, it's necessary and relevant. All of you hopefully are having a deeper experience of something you value here, whether it's health or creativity or spirituality or your yoga practice or whatever it is that's deeply meaningful to you. But it took money. You had to buy the ticket. In most cases, you had to travel here. So money is relevant. But here's the thing, is that it's not the same thing as the value itself. So to just say, well, if I have this much money, I'm going to be happy and my life is going to be meaningful and I'm going to be free, it doesn't line up. It doesn't add up. For this book, I interviewed, it's called The Education of Millionaires, and I interviewed 50 self-made millionaires and 5 self-made billionaires, all of whom either didn't go to college or dropped out of college. So self-educated, self-made, they were either born poor or born middle class, but none of them inherited money. And what I saw spending time with these people was an incredible diversity of happiness. I mean, really, it was all across the spectrum. Because here's the thing, having money solves a lot of problems. It solves where you're going to live, where's your head going to rest in the next month, what am I going to eat, where can I go on vacation, what kind of health care can I get. So it solves a lot of problems. People who have more money have privilege in that way. There's just no way around that. And what I've noticed from very wide travels in my life in different parts of the world, different social groups, different socioeconomic classes and groupings and everything, I've pretty much seen a very wide swath of humanity in my path through life, and I'm sure all of you have as well. What I've noticed is some of these basic human joys and also basic human pains are just not correlated to financial wealth whatsoever. Drug addiction and drug abuse, pretty much runs right up through the socioeconomic scale. And of course, money impacts these things. I'm not denying that. But sexual abuse, patterns of family trauma run right up and down financial scales. Nasty divorces. That's one where, in some cases, the one where money is involved is way nastier. Because once you get both a romantic dispute and a financial dispute mixed, that can get real nasty. So there really isn't a strong correlation between happiness and money once your basics are covered, once you're not wondering where you're going to sleep and those kind of things, and whether you can get health care for your children. Once you're kind of past basic level, there just isn't a correlation whatsoever. So probably most of you are past that level of subsistence if you're coming to a festival like this. So I would recommend that you basically give up in your mind the idea that there's any strong correlation between how much money you have in the future, saved up, what you're earning, all these things, and whether you're going to have a rich experience of these things you care about, whether you're going to have the art, the creativity, the health, the finances, the romance, the relationships, the sex life, the spirituality, whatever. Just try for a week. Or how about this? Try for the rest of this weekend. Just giving up the idea that there's any correlation between those whatsoever. So what happens when you create that space in your mind? It allows you to see the ways that money is correlated to your happiness. Okay, because I'm all in favor of you all earning more money. I'm all in favor of you having more financial resources. But the best thing to do with financial resources is to use them to create what you value in the world, and to be really, really, really clear on what you value and why it's important for people beyond you and your immediate family. And if you get tapped in to what you care about and why it's of service to a range of people beyond just your immediate kin, you will find all kinds of ways why it's useful to have money. There's all kinds of things. Money is extremely useful. And if you're clear on how it can be of service, you're going to create an economy where there's a non-financial economy, an economy where value is being exchanged in a community, in a tribe, in a social circle, however you want to call it, in ways that aren't directly, that use money, but that aren't all about money. I think that one of the most exciting, valuable, meaningful human experiences is to collaborate on something you deeply care about with people you love collaborating with. Personally, I think that's about as good as it gets. And different people have different aspects of that in their workplace. A lot of people have the experience of loving the team they're working with at their work, but not actually caring that much about what the team is working on. But if you can get those aligned, like caring what your team is working on, caring what your group, your community, whatever it is working on, and loving the people you're working on, that's an incredible human experience. And that creates abundance. And not in some kind of new age woo-woo way where there's radar beams going out in the world and attracting it like they talk about in The Secret. That's not the way it works. When you have people coming together doing something they care about for a wider purpose, that is an attractive thing. And I'm not talking about sexual or romantic attraction here. I'm literally talking about it attracts. It attracts other people, it attracts resources, and there's an aliveness to it. There's a humanistic aliveness. And so many people are feeling so alienated right now by the collapsing financial system and are wondering what's next. And my sense is that something along the lines of humanistic currency is what's next, where we have an understanding about how we exchange value in human communities in non-financial, non-quantifiable ways. And we're still going to have money. It's probably going to be digital and it's probably not going to be controlled by any specific government agencies. It's probably going to be something along the lines of Bitcoin or whatever comes after it. So money's still going to be there, but like if I, in 10 or 20 years, if I said, well, how many people think Bitcoin is the most valuable thing in the world, and open my talk like that, again, we get probably 0 hands up, or maybe 1 or 2. So this problem is always going to be reoccurring about like, okay, we have financial money circulating, but what is the relationship between that to these humanistic, non-financial, non-quantifiable values? And my hope is that in this first little part, I've given you food for thought that kind of like, interesting, I hadn't thought about that. And if you can just, I don't necessarily want you to walk away with like, oh, now I understand everything, and now I have a clear picture forward. But here's what I want you to walk away with is just a little bit of space to start thinking about value exchange, currency, investing, all these things separate from the concept of money. And once you do that, not only are you going to find a much more humanistic richness in your experience, but the paradox is in my experience, and I've written 2 business books and I'm surrounded by business people, in my experience, once you let go of that, it actually, the money comes in more abundance. I don't quite know why that happens, but it's been my experience. And there's a lot of things in life like that where it's like love, for example, like if you're chasing love, like I need love, if I don't have it, like that scares love away. When you've just surrendered to like, okay, I already have love. Love is here, and I'm going to have more love. That's an attractive state that actually attracts love. There's that paradox. So I would love to get into a discussion about this and hear your questions or thoughts, or just open it up for dialogue of what comes up from what I say.